Texted questions from the overflow.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, let me be school-marmish about this. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Turner. Hi, I'm Nick Turner. I am the new president of the Vera Institute of Justice. I'm delighted that you all are here on what is a cold day, so welcome to Duluth, Minnesota. This is the beginning of what is really a great series for us. It's very nice to see so many people in the room who I know, and then so many who I look forward to getting to know over the what I hope will be not a short tenure in my role. Vera has a remarkable privilege of working to advance justice and fairness in systems that people rely upon for safety and security. And to do that work with people in positions of authority in government and stakeholders and people in the community. And it's a wonderful thing to look across this room and see it filled with a variety of people who care about the issues that we care about from a variety of perspectives. And we're very happy to share the space with them. We have been, we decided a few months ago that we wanted to organize this series, which we're calling Justice in Transition, because we were facing a circumstance where we would have the first new mayor in 12 years in New York City. And the record of the last mayor really has much to recommend it. And we knew that we would be having a new mayor who is self-described as, I'm trying to think of what the word is, progressive. And so we wondered what it meant, to have progressive, what it would mean to have a progressive running government here in New York, and what it would mean for progressive pursuit of justice, and thought that it was a critical discussion to have and to raise some of the important issues to understand what has been accomplished in the past 12 years, and to also think about what needs to be accomplished and what the challenges are that we're confronting over the next few years. So we've conceived of this breakfast series. This is the first one. We have a number of other parts of the series that we will be conducting over the course of the next few months. There will be a breakfast discussion on community-based justice initiatives, such as an adult probation innovation that Commissioner Schiraldi has been leading. We'll also look a little bit in that one at some of the work that Vera has been doing with NYCHA around reentry and public housing. There will be another discussion around what justice means in a multicultural city, which this city is. And we're doing another one on rethinking Rikers, which will look at issues of segregation and mental health and a wide variety of issues as well. So stay tuned for those. We have also, you may have noticed when you walked in, there were two short briefs that were on the table in the foyer about some of the juvenile justice accomplishments and then some recommendations for the future. We probably beginning in the early fall started working on a series of 5 papers to try to again sort of encapsulate the lessons of the past few years. And think about the strengths of what had occurred over the past few years and what the challenges were, and again, what the advice should be to an administration going further. So if you didn't see those documents when you came in, you can grab them on your way out, and you can visit our website where you will see the other 3 that don't pertain to juvenile justice. So today we are going to talk about juvenile justice in New York City. It has been a topic that is much on the minds of many people. Those of you who listened to or read about Governor Cuomo's State of the State know that he has something to say about juvenile justice and something to say about raise the age. That's probably something that is much on everyone's mind. But I think what we're going to try to do is really focus on local efforts, and I think we have an amazing platform to start with. I want to pause for just a quick second before I turn things over to Kathleen Horan, who is from WNYC, who we are delighted to have moderating this panel, and just reflect a little bit on what I think has been accomplished over the past few years. And it's hard for me to reflect on that without thinking about my own return to Vera. For those of you who don't know me, I mean, I started as president in mid-August. But I had been at Vera for about 9 years, from 1998 until 2007, and I've told a number of people that I have had sort of two sorts of experiences. One is sort of a Groundhog Day kind of experience, where a lot of the stuff that I see in the world and a lot of the faces that I see and a lot of the issues that I'm rediscovering are ones that I saw when I was here before. And then the other phenomenon is what I describe as sort of the Rip Van Winkle experience, which is I feel like I've woken up from this long, long nap, and the world seems really different. So the discussion around juvenile justice in a way feels very much like that. I really do feel like Rip Van Winkle, except I'm not of Dutch heritage and I don't have a long beard, but I'm hoping that puberty will eventually allow me to grow a beard at some point. But until that happens, let me just say a little bit about what I've seen. I mean, when I started working on juvenile justice issues in New York, it was probably around 2002. And there are around 1,300 young people in placement, being sent upstate to OCFS facilities. And many of you in the room know that that was both an expensive proposition, but also something that didn't provide for good outcomes for young people and their families. The recidivism rate was very high. 2007, ACS, the Administration for Children's Services, launched the Juvenile Justice Initiative, and then in 2012, New York undertook what I think is really a remarkable strategy, something that we all refer to as close to home, which is really a groundbreaking realignment of the system, designed to bring many youth who were placed in facilities upstate back home, close to their homes and close to their families, where they could receive the kind of care and have the kind of contact and support systems that they need in order to succeed in later life. If you were to look at the bookend, I may not have my figures right, but I think that it was in 2012 the number of young people in placement was south of 500. So there's a remarkable it's a progression. I mean, it is a downward progression, but it is absolutely a progression. And you see the same thing when you look at the detention system. That from 2006 until 2013, the city, I think, saw something close to a 40% decrease in the average daily population in detention. I don't know if I have the dates exactly right, but again, you see the same thing. So we're standing on a platform it's the right trajectory of a lot of success and innovation, and then the question that arises is, what do we do next? What do we need to do? Another question is, what do we need to do better, and how do we advance justice and fairness in a way that continues in this direction and perhaps even accelerates it? So. Before I introduce Kathleen, just a really quick housekeeping thing, although you may have heard from people when you already came in the room. If you need to excuse yourself to use the bathroom, you absolutely may. For the men, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
You're more than welcome, Commissioner. Don't sit in discomfort. For the men, the men's bathroom is literally like right around the corner. You will walk out the door and then you make a quick U-turn. For the women who will have healthier hearts, you get to walk around the building all the way, so past where you came in, and then back on the other side of the U, and then you will, and then the bathroom will be off to your right. So there's that. And now what I'd like to do is introduce Kathleen. Like I said before, we are really delighted to have her here with us today. You, I'm sure, have heard her voice. Now you get to see her in person. She's been a staff reporter at NYC since, I think, 2006. She covers the criminal justice beat, and what many of you may have heard in recent memory is a remarkable series that she did, remarkable and heart-wrenching, where she profiled every New York City child who had been killed with a gun over the course of a year, and told their stories to help us understand them and their lives a little bit better beyond the spare statistics. So Kathleen, thanks for your wonderful reporting. I'm going to step away from here. I get to do one last thing, which I'm super excited about. I get to benight Commissioner Schiraldi, like I am the Queen of England, except it is only a microphone. So,
Thank you, sir.
There you are. Maybe we could all applause for
Good morning. Pardon me if I clear my throat quite a bit. I'm getting over a cold. So, but I'm happy to be your moderator, and few things get me out of bed this early in the morning, so I must be excited. So anyways, I was honored to be asked to participate in this first of the briefing series by Vera. So let's dig into some of the issues. I should mention how we're dividing up the conversation. First, we'll speak individually for about 8 minutes. I'm supposed to really keep the eyes on the clock. Then we'll talk, we'll kind of have a free-form discussion for about 10 minutes. Then we want to open it up to you. For those of you on Twitter, the hashtag today is Justice-NYC. And we'd be happy if you tweeted this out and did all those things. So anyways, let me introduce this fine panel. Vincent Schiraldi is Commissioner of the New York City Department of Probation, where he has served since February 2010. Prior to that, Schiraldi served as Washington, D.C.'s first ever director of the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, where he launched major reforms. He brings 30 years of experience working with troubled youth and juvenile justice systems to New York City. Rukia, welcome. Rukia Lumumba recently joined CASES as Director of Youth Programs. CASES is an organization that provides community-based sentencing options to individuals who are court-involved in New York City. Ms. Lumumba comes to CASES with more than 12 years of experience in youth development and justice. Prior to joining CASES, she was the Director of Youth Services at the Center for Community Alternatives, where she oversaw management of their youth program unit. If I mispronounce anyone's name, please correct me. Did I do okay?
You did great.
Great. Hernan Carvente, did I do it? All right. Please say it. Please
Carvente.
say it. Thank you. See? Is a research assistant at Vera, where he works on projects related to juvenile justice and family engagement. He is also a senior at the CUNY John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where he is pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice. Mr. Carvente's goal to advance efforts aiming to reform the structure of the U.S. criminal justice system stems from his own experience in the system. And finally, Commissioner Gladys Carrión is the newly appointed Commissioner of the New York City Administration for Children's Services. For the previous 7 years, if you can imagine, Commissioner Carrión oy vey, served as Commissioner of the Office of Children and Family Services, a $4 billion agency charged with overseeing the state's child welfare services, including foster care, adoption, and juvenile delinquency. As the head of OCFS, Carrión is credited with overhauling an abusive state juvenile detention system marred by an 89% recidivism rate. Let's have a hand for our panelists. So you're the first victim.
Okay.
So you've been involved in the juvenile justice system for many years, and you...
Not as many as Gladys, though.
He was in the juvenile justice system.
You guys go way back, as they say, right?
Right.
And you played a major role in putting close to home in place. What are the obstacles to moving forward and going beyond the successes we've seen so far and we just heard about?
So thank you guys for inviting me. Thanks for having me on the panel, and Vera for putting this together, and for the wonderful report you guys just did on Close to Home. I think hopefully it'll be the first of many that over time, I think the proof of the pudding on Close to Home will be in the eating, and we've only just sort of had the appetizer so far in the first year plus of Close to Home. So I think what we know now is going to be very different than what we know 5 or 10 years from now as to whether this is a reform worth emulating, and I hope that groups like Vera and John Jay and others study the heck out of it and critique it in a sort of honest and forthright and transparent way, because I think it's a huge watershed change in the way states and counties deal with juvenile justice. I think in the mid-1800s, we began shipping Irish and Eastern European kids to far away, upstate, large prison-like correctional facilities, partly out of benign intent and calling them rehabilitative places, and partly because we wanted them off the streets while their parents worked long hours in sweatshops. And the core of what we do is not all that foreign to that today. I think we ship a lot of black and brown kids today. The underclass is always filled, our correctional facilities, juvenile and adult, and we're no different than that today. But in New York, we dramatically changed that. We sort of struck a blow at the heart of the institution-based, state-centralized system in a way that really hasn't been done before, maybe arguably had been done in Wayne County, Michigan, Detroit, and took almost all the kids from family court back from that in a way that I think holds the promise, not yet realized, but the promise of having them in fewer being incarcerated, and when they are incarcerated in smaller, A, more benign, and B, maybe even helpful facilities that their parents can look at, their lawyers can go to, citizens can stick their noses in, so that we don't have the kind of atrocities that we tend to associate with state centralized systems in New York and every other place in the country. It was not unique to New York. So I'm thrilled that we passed that watershed moment. We passed it imperfectly, as one would expect for such a large change. Were you gonna?
Well, I was just, and what is, I'm sure there's a lot of obstacles to moving forward, but just what is, if you could remove one right away, what would it be?
I think that we did a decent job in Close to Home of reallocating the funds from the state system to the city's control. What we didn't do quite as well, and it is done in other jurisdictions better, is tie the flow of money to the flow of bodies. We did get the money and the kids back from the state, but in, say, Ohio or California, there's almost a per capita funding stream that says if you don't put this kid in a correctional facility, you will get this much money to program him or her in the community. Because all the money came back to the city, it seems like that happened, but it really didn't happen, right? And so Gladys and I are both very committed to having few kids lose their liberty and go to confinement facilities. But it's not difficult to imagine a probation commissioner that isn't, right? And if not, it's really sort of stunning to me because I've never been in probation before except for the last 4 years, but all of my incentives lead me to institutionalize kids, right? They're a pain in the neck, right? Conceivably, they're the difficult ones that are borderline calls for institutionalization are challenging to deal with. If I don't institutionalize them and they do something wrong, I take a hit, right? Because I look in the New York Post like a guy to just let him go free. And it doesn't cost me in my budget, which, for bureaucrats matters, it doesn't cost me anything. It costs the city something, used to cost the state something, but it doesn't cost me anything. So we challenged that somewhat in the Close to Home initiative by requiring it to be a structured decision-making model and a new risk assessment instrument, but we didn't strike at its core by having a money flow go from one place to the other, or by saying, for example, something that Gladys had talked about a lot, that misdemeanors can't get confined. We didn't do any of those things. And so there could come a time when somebody could say, the heck with this, or where a crazy case could occur, and then all of a sudden, boom, we could do that. And I don't think close to home, as it's currently structured, has an effective way of curbing that. So right now it's left to well-thinking, well-meaning government officials who only rent our chairs, don't own them, and the advocacy community to stay on top of.
So that money that would go per child per bed, is that in a pot of money that waits if a child is incarcerated?
That's one way of looking at it. Yes, it's certainly in the city's budget right now but it doesn't define it one way or the other. I mean, it certainly would be costly to the city if all of a sudden we started to ship more kids into close to home facilities. We didn't, by the way. That's the good news. The first year, the Vera report found the placement rate dropped from 15% to 10. And that's very impressive. It's a 33% decline. And that's during the first year when there was some fear on everybody's part that the judges would kind of like these new, shiny, in the neighborhoods, don't have to send the kid up to the Adirondacks facilities, right? That the judges might reverse the decade-plus long trend to declining placements, but it didn't happen, and it didn't happen in a big way. So that's cool, but not because the law made it not happen. It didn't happen for a bunch of other reasons, but not because the law required it or even incentivized it financially.
And just, I'm just wondering if these newer facilities, these group home-like facilities, right, do they cost less per child than?
I think that the Gladys really's got to answer that one better than me.
We're gonna push the pause.
The answer is no.
Yeah. But I think that the state estimated an overall, once it's going fully, $29 million savings, largely because this also allowed the state to more quickly close down facilities. It used to take a year, now it's 90 days under close to home, which is huge savings. But I don't think the per kid costs are different. I do think that the per kid costs go more towards the kinds of things we'd all like to see, which is better staff to kid ratios and more mental health services, et cetera. And before, because of the state law that required you to give a year's notice, there were a lot of costs that were attendant upon partially or fully empty facilities that went into that cost. So more of it's for good stuff, but I don't, as Gladys already said, it's not less per kid per day.
I have a follow-up question that we probably don't have much time for, but let's take a stab at it. Have we done enough to reach out to the communities affected? It's kind of an open-ended question, but... Yeah,
I mean, we certainly did what the law required. I think we did actually a little more than the law required in terms of having town hall meetings, et cetera. I think some of the nonprofits have advisory boards for the locales they're in. I think ACS has a board now that sort of oversees the facilities. You know, in probation on our adult side, we've very much been busy redefining the notion of who our client is, to define it as the community itself rather than the individual sitting before us, so it's not just a sort of individual pathology model. I think we could do more of that in close to home.
I think that's
probation, ACS, all of us. It's not just and people in this room, all of us.
I think that's a great transition to Rukia. As you work in the trenches, so to speak, you work with communities.
Yes.
And what are you hearing from the folks you work with, the people that you see daily, about what's been going on?
Well, first I want to also thank you and thank Vera for having me, and I'm really appreciative and I'm honored to sit up here on this panel because the people up here have done a remarkable job during their time in their respective positions. I mean, we all know the successes, and I am happy to have been here when they were happening, and I'm happy to be here on this panel to sit next to them to talk about what needs to happen moving forward. So I work in what I would definitely consider the trenches, very long hours. And I work with not only youth who are justice involved, but also their families. And I work with judges who are taking the big risk of allowing these young people to go out into the communities. And we work with, probation, and we work with caseworkers, social service workers. We work with a number of people. So when I think of who I work with a variety of stakeholders. And what the common theme I think that all of them are saying is that there needs to be community reinvestment. So it's similar to what Vinny is saying, what Commissioner Schiraldi is saying, to really take funds and put them back in the communities so that community members, there are programs in the communities where community members can take back the responsibility and resources for ensuring the safety and well-being of their own children. And this allows for sustainability, right? Long after government administrations have changed. It really, really is something that will really allow communities to be self-sufficient. It's what judges are looking for.
What kinds of things are you talking about? Can you use examples and kind of be specific?
So, for example, right now we have, I would say, a growing wealth of alternative to incarceration and detention programs, which is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And most of those programs are court mandated and require court mandates. But a lot of those programs are funded to only provide the bare minimum. And a lot of those programs aren't allowed, they were established prior to this new administration, and so they're not necessarily in the communities, working in the neighborhoods that these kids live in. And so they need additional funding to do that, right? We also need additional funding to allow for these community providers to provide educational services in their facilities, to provide social services, to link with ACS, to provide more trauma therapy, which is extremely important. The first time a young person is arrested is a traumatic experience, and we have to really take hold of that and recognize the mental health needs of our young people. It also, when a young person is arrested, it affects the family and all those that live in that neighborhood that are associated with that young person. And so really engaging in some more in-home services and community programs that are right there where, Miss Jane, who watched you get shot, can also go and get that, service and therapy. When you're coming home, when a young person is coming home out of detention, already having the community equipped to deal with that reentry into that community. So,
And, sort of riffing off of this, do you have a wish list for the next administration? I mean, you've already kind of said some of those things, but, you've got a blank piece of paper. What do you put on it?
There's a lot to put on it. But, I think that, one, of course, is really the community reinvestment. The other thing is really to pay close attention to raising the age of criminal responsibility. That is significant, and we have been a model as it relates to alternatives to incarceration and detention, and really shifting our system away from focusing on punishment and really focusing more on accountability and youth development and safer communities. And we can't allow our state to be the last to really raise the age of criminal responsibility for all children. And that's significant, so that's one. The other thing is disproportionate minority contact. It's really important that the new administration take time and really focus on that and see how we can really, not only for face value, but in practice, change that occurrence of where so many Black and brown young people and a growing number of Southeast Asian and Muslim communities are being targeted by, police and by our systems.
Anecdotally, have you seen that go down at all? Have you seen that shift at all in the last couple of years?
When we're talking about, I think that the reality is that I would rather speak to what families are saying, and youth and families are saying that they don't feel the difference yet, right? And so I think we have to listen to what they're saying, and we have to involve them more in the conversation to see how we can do a better job of decreasing that.
Hernan, you've had the experience of being removed from your family. You know firsthand some of what we're talking about. that you also have the experience of working on criminal justice policy. You have a rare position. How do your personal experiences inform your work, especially as new strategies are crafted to help youth stay out of the criminal justice system?
Well, let me begin by thanking everyone again for being here and for allowing me to share my own personal experience as well. You know, just basically to take it back a little bit for, you know, with my own life experience, I can sum it all up by having said, you know, I went through the justice system. I spent 4 years in that system, in the secure placement system under OCFS. But in reality, you know, a lot of these issues started at home prior to me having even stepped into the system. I mean, I came from a background where pretty much for the most part my family was broken. I had a lot of support from family members outside of my own, you know, immediate family, which was my mom and my father. And I was raised in an undocumented, family structured setting. And as a result, both of my parents struggled a lot to work endlessly and to do a lot of things for themselves. And in the end, that work really paid off. Now, I realize how important that work was. But back then, my relationship with them was very strained. And having to work so many hours really got my father, you know, in terms of stressed out. He used to drink a lot, alcoholic. I eventually carried on and did the same thing, became an alcoholic at a very young age. At age 8 was actually the first time I ever had a drink. My father became very abusive with my mother, which made me, to a certain extent, abusive myself with my own partner at the time. Even though I was very young, 13, 14, I was already acting like my own father. And in reality, that is, you know, a lot of those things, those factors led me to joining a gang, to hanging out with the wrong crew, and really closing myself to positive individuals who cared and who wanted to help me at that time. It was really about just kind of setting a wall between me and anybody that wanted to help, out of fear that, you know, my family would face repercussion, fear that I would be judged a certain way, and eventually I went into the system for having committed the crime of attempted murder. Being that I was a gang member, I went after a rival gang member. And that in itself, like I said, was an experience that to this day I have to live with, given that I have a criminal record, and that every day, you know, that I come and do work here at Vera or any event that I speak at, I always have to reflect on that to, you know, kind of get everybody to understand why I'm sitting in this panel, for example. I mean, the work that I've been doing thus far, you know, here at Vera has allowed me the ability to, you know, bring a lot of my experiences from my own childhood, but at the same time, from having been in the system. I went into the system in November of 2008. I was arrested in June, but given the court process and everything, did not go upstate until November of 2008. During that time, I went through numerous changes. I always say that I went through 3 phases of, you know, change. The first one was really kind of like going through an identity kind of crisis, really trying to see who I was, what I wanted to do. And that's what a lot of the work now, you know, looking at it in terms of young people, how they identify themselves. It's always hard for them to see themselves as something different when you're in the system or where you've pretty much been labeled for the rest of your life. And most of us feel that way. The second phase of that was really deciding whether or not I wanted to continue a life of, you know, a crime, or whether or not I wanted to be a college student at the facility that I was located in. And really it took staff during that time, frontline staff there who spoke to me, who believed in me, to really get me to see that I had potential. And eventually some of them pushed me, not in the nicest way possible. Some of them really were very offensive in terms of, you can't get your GED, you're too dumb to get your GED, you don't have any confidence in yourself. And that really was a touch to my pride, which is why now looking back, you know, I can see where the work needs to be done in terms of the education. I saw the importance of getting my education while I was there. That GED definitely helped me a lot. Once I went into the college program, I met a wonderful man by the name of James DeCane, who serves right now as the director of the college program in that facility. And he honestly saved my life during that time. He taught me the value of education. He made me realize that I had to enter the third stage of that change while I was in the system, which basically was picking a road and sticking to it. He made me go through, my own life experiences, and in the end, I resorted to quitting that program 3 times because of that push. I wasn't prepared for it at the time. And I quit the program because I really didn't believe in myself those 3 times. The third time came back, it was really me having to beg him to come back, me having to show him that I wanted it. I had to take college courses, without credit. I had to become a leader in the program. And that's where I realized where all the changes were happening, because of the relationships that I had built with staff, this professor, and the education, the way it impacted my life and the way it changed my perspective. That change affected my family indirectly. And, going back to the work and what I'm doing now.
I just wondered, what did it take for you to begin to believe in yourself? Certainly kind of a persistence, it sounds like, trial and error, partly being sort of pissed off, right? But how would you put it into words?
The transformation happened through those relationships and education. Really, like I said, nobody had taken the time to sit down with me, have a conversation, and get at the core of my problems. It was really about, just avoiding me because I was very aggressive. I didn't want to contact, and I didn't want contact with anyone. And in reality, it took that persistency from staff and certain staff, not all staff. I can't, vouch for all staff. I have to put that out there because there are staff, like I said, who have essentially, and I don't blame them. I mean, they've been accustomed to a punitive system for a long period of time, but some of them still believe in young people. And the more, newer staff, fresh staff are usually the ones that can come in there and still provide some kind of support.
So the people that saw through that kind of, that layer of kind of pushing people away when you actually needed them more than you could express.
Right.
What kind of ways do you think we might be missing to incorporate voices like yours? I mean, yours is such an incredible story, and there's so many kids that are probably in very similar situations. What do you think we could be doing?
Well, I think right now we have a lot of work, that needs to be done in juvenile justice and just in all the systems in general. And I think it's important to have the voices of those young people at the table at all times, setting up different advisory groups and really allowing the young people to become leaders themselves in this work. I know we have a lot of, experts across the country who are very familiar with the systems, with the different program models, with the risk assessments that need to be, implemented to get a system running and operating, in a comprehensive way. But the young people themselves, their experience can inform the work in a much more effective way. And through holding, an advisory group, in any agency, you get a sense of, what's going on, no longer from the researcher going in there and asking questions, but directly from the young people and everybody listening to it as opposed to reading it on paper or on a report. And
at what point should we collectively give up on a kid?
Never. The moment you give up on a child is the moment the juvenile justice system has failed. That is the way I look at it. If you want to do meaningful work, you have to believe in the young people, no matter what the circumstances are, and continue pushing forth, with trying to get that person to change his life around.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Carrión. Much of the responsibility for moving the system forward falls on your burdened shoulders. No pressure. The agency you now lead, but you have so much experience from the state, so it seems like a great pick on behalf of the mayor. But with the strong background you bring and involvement in the implementation of Close to Home, what's your vision or kind of short-term goal for the next era of justice for young people in these communities?
So before I answer that question, I have to, say that I'm very, very proud of Hernan and share with you that I'm like a proud mom. Don't tell my two other children. But he actually went recently to visit the facility he was in.
Wow.
And visited the college program, and it was amazing. and some staff, and he went dressed like he is now in a suit and looking very professional, and some of the staff members recognized him. And it was incredible impact in the facility when they knew he was there and recognized him, and they were so proud of his accomplishments. And it really was a transformational moment in the facility, both for the kids who rallied around you, right, and the staff to see success, because they don't see that often, and that was so important. So, you know, he's just a wonderful example of what happens when we invest in young people and we care about them and we give them every chance they need to be successful. So.
Thank you.
So what am I going to do? I have no idea.
You had a week,
you know, this is week 3, and I've dealt with 2 child fatalities wearing my child welfare hat. So, you know, it is a very unique position that I find myself in, having run the state system and having oversight responsibility for the agency now that I run. So I certainly have great insights into ACS, you know, from a different vantage point. You know, in terms of, you know, there's some larger issues that Vinny touched upon that, you know, I think as a state that we need and that you spoke about in terms of what we need to do from a state's perspective to really solidify the work that we have done. And that's really important. And codifying a lot of what we've done into the law is really important. And as Vinny spoke about the fact that should folks that come after us are not like-minded, some of our achievements and progress can easily be undone. So I do think that it's important that we focus on how do we make sure that we can sustain the progress that we have made in our system. I think that what is really, and you know, I think that the next area we're focused on raise the age, and that's really important. We have a commission that the governor is going to shortly announce, the members of the commission, but I think that's just the beginning of the work, and it's really, really important, because while the governor said that we're going to raise the age, the question is, how is that going to look? And that's really important, and so I don't think that we can rest until, you know, that actually happens, and that is going to be a battle. I don't think anybody should think that that is going to be an easy lift.
Who are the opponents to that?
Oh my God, when do we begin? So, you know, I think that there's certainly some, because, you know, in the law enforcement community that are concerned about it. I do think that there are many in the law enforcement community that think that we should raise the age of criminal responsibility. And I should remember to remind everybody that's not just the upper age, but you know that in New York State, you can come into the system at the age of 7. So we didn't have any at the age of, you know, at 7 in the state, but there's always that possibility, right? So there's also, you know, in the legislature, and particularly the Republicans, who are very concerned about raising the age and concerned about public safety. I think there's a concern, whether it's real or not, about the cost, the impact that it's going to have on the system, in terms of are we going to need like a massive number of additional facilities and beds, which we all know that was not the experience in Connecticut. And I think that overall I'm sure there's sectors where there's real concern about public safety that need to be addressed. And I think those are some of the issues. And there's some concern about the very, very small population of violent youth. And you know, I think that the commission will be focused on all of those issues, but I think it's important that we are very much vigilant and involved in that work, because we want to make sure that we can raise the age of criminal responsibility, and we do it in a way that is raising the age for all young people. Mm-hmm. So I also think that narrowing the front door is really important. You know, I think that we should, you know, we have real outrage about the fact that we're one of 2 states that still has the age of criminal responsibility 16, but I think that we should be embarrassed that Texas, for instance, that's not known as any great bastion of, you know, progressive politics actually does limit the young people that come into its system. And it's only 4 felonies and doesn't allow misdemeanors to come into the system, unlike our system. So work there and continuing to narrow the front door is really important. Now it's close to home. We have to continue, and I think as we know, and many people in this room know, our first year in implementing close to home was challenging, and I think that now we really need to deepen that work and make sure that we continue to improve how we've implemented the first phase of close to home and the work. And we certainly have lots of experiences in the state as we've moved to improve our system. And so hopefully I bring all that experience in helping us work with our partners, which are the agencies, that actually provide the services, and how we can help them to deepen the work and support them. And I think that, the second phase of Close to Home, which is our limited secure, which was scheduled to start in March, will not start in March, and we're going to delay the implementation of Close to Home.
Can you explain a little bit about what the next phase was supposed to look like?
Well, the next phase is the young people that are designated as limited secure, which means that they are
kind of in the middle of.
Well, it's all I hesitate because it's all misnomers, right? And it's a classification that's meaningless, quite frankly. And so I never want to legitimatize that. So I hesitate because, there's not all that great of a difference of the young people. Young people in our system have tremendous needs. And it's not related to risk, quite frankly, at all. And I think we all in this room know that, and that's why I'm careful, because you all get back to me. Remind me then.
Can we talk a little bit about how risk is assessed? Maybe, Commissioner Schiraldi and you, because that has changed over time, right? How we assess risk.
I mean, initially for Close to Home, young people came into our system as unspecified. And it was up to OCFS to decide what level of care essentially they needed. And so it was really based from a state's perspective on where we had our resources. So where did we have our mental health supports? Where did we have specialized programs? And so those young people were in those facilities that were designated as limited secure that actually did have a lot more hardware than a non-secure facility, but they weren't necessarily there because of their crime or offense or their level of risk. So it's challenging to answer that question truthfully. So I think now with Close to Home, where judges now have the responsibility of designating, and there are some instruments that probation will soon be using, right, Vinny? That will help them make recommendations to the court with a validated, where's Vera? A validated instrument that will help the judges make decisions about the level of risk and need. And Vinny's, fidgeting in that chair.
Well,
I'm interested in how that is assessed.
Sure. Well, there's two things here. One is the designation of which facility a kid goes to, and the other is the risk the kid poses if they don't get locked up, or what chance they are of getting rearrested.
Because before sentencing, there's a
pre-sentence report.
Pre-sentence that a probation officer will kind of
do, right, and make a recommendation, right? So, just. On the subject Gladys talked about, in terms of which facility the kids go to, I don't think probation or the judiciary should be involved in it. I think they should commit the kids unspecified to the experts, and they should figure out which facilities they go to based on a variety of factors, including what kind of services they have available, what the kids' needs are. Yes, I guess some level of risk, of course, should be brought in. I don't think probation should have a skin in that game, but because of the way Close to Home is implemented in a justifiable way, where we phased in the non-secure kids first and then the limited secure kids second, the courts are seeking our guidance on which of these two places, one of which is run by the city, the other of which is still run by the state, where they should send the kid. And so it puts us in an awkward spot for now because I don't think we have the expertise. And I suspect
but there is an instrument that's been developed that helps.
And we'll develop that expertise just when it becomes moot. Right. because then they'll have both kinds of facilities and then they should just do it themselves.
Because as Rukia was saying, so many factors go into, a child's well-being or their risk.
Right.
But when we've talked before, we discussed a little bit about some of these factors, which I found surprising. Many of you in the room might know, but things like recreational activities,
Right.
not just, family and housing, but things that are sort of, kind of more nuanced.
Sure. So the more fun part for me as probation commissioner is, assessing risk and needs and then working up, sort of plans that can affect the kid's life course and outcomes, right? And in the old days it was very sort of rote, your prior record, your current offense severity, but better and better research over time has begun to talk about what correlates with kids getting rearrested and what protective factors exist to help kids, sort of matriculate out of delinquency.
Like what?
And so housing was one we talk about. Also, use of recreational time, peers, education, substance abuse. And so the exciting part about that is your prior record is, you can't really change your prior record, right? Your past is your past. But you can change your housing situation. You can develop new educational opportunities. You can steer kids towards healthier peers, mentors, YMCAs. You can engage in a bunch of positive youth development programs that help young people, like all of us would do with any of our kids when we're growing up, right? But when they're growing up, but also that researchers increasingly show mitigate their risk and make them a better shot at living a kind of healthy, happy lives we all want them to live. That's more fun than it is picking between Gladys's facilities and, for my staff. It's a weird thing for us to have to pick. The other stuff I think is right in our wheelhouse and makes a great, interesting conversation with the courts. The courts kind of like that. It's like, whoa, this is new information.
It's more individualized, too.
Absolutely. And my staff, Anna Bermudez is my deputy commissioner, and Janine Gray is the associate commissioner. There's a bunch of other folks, Reagan Daly, Denise, Randy are here. This is what they're doing all day long now. They're trying to figure out the best instrument and then trying to get the staff to use it instead of the old seat of the pants, you pissed me off when you were sitting in my office, so I'm going to recommend placement.
And just kind of check off boxes or
something. Yeah. Or really, there was just a lot of, I looked in his eye and I saw blah, 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 blah. I'm sure a lot of people looked in your eye, right? You saw a whole bunch of different, I looked in his eye and he's going to be nothing but crap. I looked in his eye and he's going to be a college student.
Is that
I can't make stuff up all
over. Or got 101, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The attitude box,
Yeah.
Does anyone here want to kind of riff off that or weigh in a little bit? Because we're gonna open it up to the audience pretty soon, but I want this to be kind of more, jump in.
I mean, I think that I could just add to that by saying, an example of using the risk assessment instrument is the ATD initiative, the Alternative to Detention Initiative citywide, where for years, since 2007, in family court, young people before disposition are allowed to participate. Judges have the ability to place them in an after-school program that they go to 5 days a week, or based on their risk level, they may only call in for curfew, and that's it. It's really, and the goal is to give them something else recreational to do and some supportive services during the pendency of their case to decrease the risk of recidivism and decrease the risk of harm to themselves. And so I think that, it's an example. And that instrument includes some of the things that Commissioner Schiraldi just talked about. And then the other thing that I would just like to add, on a separate note, is one wish that I did not mention, is to really address the school-to-prison pipeline. It is a really serious problem.
What's the next step in that? Because I hear that a lot, and it seems like such a, an important issue. Is it getting metal detectors out of schools? Is it stop calling the police when the principal should handle it? What is the thing that should be done this year?
I mean, I think it's all of that, and I also think that it is really, having a conversation about and making change to have the police, the school safety placed back under the Department of Education. Because, like you just said, there are several things that happen at school that really should be under the authority of the principal and school agents that are trained to work with young people, as opposed to police officers who, they're trained to deal with crime, real crime, right? And when a young person, I'm going to give a really, I don't know what you want to call this example, but an example, like when a person writes on the desk, where it's a discipline action such as detention, as opposed to defacing property and graffiti or a more criminal charge. And so,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you know kids, or do you have a specific example of someone who, was arrested at school for something that you don't believe they, can...
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of young people that have been arrested at school for things that are not, criminal acts in the sense that they need to be placed in a facility. For example, I'm trying to give the best example. I have so many in my head.
It's fight.
Fight, and I was going to bring it up, and I didn't know if it was a great example, but I'll say it.
It's
right?
a common example.
It's a
common, like a good example.
Very, very common example. It can even be verbal altercations, where two young people are threatening to fight, and as a result, they're arrested and placed in detention and held there, and actually cases began. One of the most common are fights. The other one is theft of a cell phone, or of another property. I've even had situations where young people have taken another person's book bag and have resulted in criminal charges brought into court.
Arrests plummet over the summer in New York City of kids.
Right.
Now, does crime plummet? The kids get better in the summers? Or is it just that there are people watching them and they can arrest? If you put all adults in a building with police, we can arrest a lot more frequently. It's not just that the kids are bad in the summer and the winter, and they're not bad in the summer.
But that's surprising, because a lot of kids, what we hear is that kids, there's not enough to do. There's not enough community centers. There's a lot of kids that have idle time and they can get in trouble.
They're no better behaved over the summer than they are during the winter. They're just less surveilled. And I'm not saying that every interaction that resulted in an arrest in a school is illegitimate. I don't think Rukia is saying that either. It's just, I went to a Catholic school, an all-boys Catholic school. We got in fights every once in a while. People stole stuff.
Girls
the cops
Catholic
were
school too.
never called to my school. No one would ever dream of calling the cops to my school. We got detention, we got hollered at, our parents got called. A bunch of stuff that actually changed our behavior, but none of it was cuffs in the back of the car.
A prime example that always gets me every time I think of this is of a young man who was in our Alternative to Incarceration program. He started when he was 14. And he completed the program successfully within less than a year. And he continued with us as a peer, as a volunteer. And he began to become engaged in our school advocacy programs, right? And the story that he consistently told is how every day when he walks to school, the first point of contact with a police officer is when he goes down to catch the train. And he's harassed about whether he has a Metro card or not. Then, after he gets out of that situation and he comes up from the train and he's walking to his school, he's harassed again by a police officer, asking, well, what are you doing? Why aren't you in school faster? And so it's that police contact. And the police know him, right? And they remember him from when he was 14 and he got arrested, right? And they've seen him throughout this period, and so he goes through that period. And then he gets to school and he has to again be addressed by police officers when he walks in the door, and has to go through the metal detectors and take off the belt and whatever change you have. And so it's that consistent, from the moment he knows when he wakes up in the morning that he's going to have at least 3 contacts with police officers before he actually gets to a class. And so it's really about really reevaluating that, and what are we doing to our children's minds when we put them through that? Are we really, helping them to develop, or are we creating a situation where they feel like it's okay to be searched and harassed and talked to like that, and maybe to eventually identify as being a criminal? Maybe I am doing something wrong.
Eventually, maybe someone can begin to relate to that. And,
right.
Well, we're going to open it up to you all. And we're going to pass the mic around. If you can raise your hand, if you could identify yourself. And we want to try to get as many people involved in the conversation as possible. So if you can try to keep it short, we'd appreciate it. Where's our mics? There's our mics. And does anyone have any questions, comments, statements, concerns? Please raise your hand. Well, I guess we should just keep talking then. It is before 10 in the morning. Right over here, please.
So, talking about raise the age.
If you could just say who you are, that'd be great.
Yeah, Fred Scaglione from the New York Nonprofit Press. In terms of raise the age, what would that mean in terms of New York City's juvenile justice system? Would it be a direct increase of the kids who are in that population now, or would have gone into that population coming into sort of a close-to-home environment? What do the numbers look like? What sort of issues does that pose for close-to-home in terms of operationally?
It's complicated as hell, Fred. I mean, because first of all, it depends on the bill, right? And then there's a whole bunch of unknown and unknowable, in essence, in advance, factors that would affect it. And so the best thing that would happen would be estimates, and the governor, I think, has charged this new commission to not only come up with what the it is, but then to start doing estimates. And so if you look at the other states that have done this recently, or that have considered it, North Carolina, Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, right? One thing, North Carolina hasn't done it, but the other three have. One thing that's tended to happen is that it hasn't had that much of an impact. As people thought, oh my God, there's going to be all these 16, 17-year-olds flooding the juvenile facilities, right? And there's so many more of them, just in those two age groups, that they tend to be all kids below 16, right? That's true in New York. The last time we looked at it, Michelle, yell at me if I get this wrong, but I think there were 12,000 arrests of everybody under 16 and 20,000 in the 16 and 17 group that, for example, probation would have to assess as to whether we're going to adjust them or not, right? That's a big increase, right, just for those 2 years. But having said that, in those other states, what has tended to happen, as Gladys sort of talked about the young kids, the young kids have tended to wash out. Right? Because right now, if you're a judge and the oldest kid you ever see is 15, well, you know what? 13-year-olds don't look that young, right? But if you start seeing 17-year-olds, 13-year-olds kind of look young, as do 14-year-olds. And so what's happened is those kids have tended to not get as much institutional placements, probation placements. And so the pickup here has tended to wash out the bottom, and there hasn't been a need for new facilities. Like Illinois changed the age. They closed the facility last year. Connecticut's got empty beds in their facility, even though they added 16 and 17-year-olds. So you would think that the exact opposite would be true. So to some degree, our best minds will have to develop the policy and then do the estimates. But to some degree, there's this unknown factor of what happens to a system once a whole bunch of different kids pull in that you almost can't estimate. And
and it also depends how you resource the system, right?
Yep.
And where your priorities, how you invest, and what you incentivize becomes really
that's right.
important. So that's why we have the commission to study all of that.
Yep.
Right over here.
They're going to make it the opposite ends of the room
Pass
for
the
you.
mic.
So it's more fun that way. Ping pong.
Hi, my name is Beth Powers from the Children's Defense Fund. Thank you all today. It's been very informative. I have a question for Commissioner Carrión. You mentioned that the limited secure phase of close to home is going to be delayed and not going to be rolling out in March as we had anticipated. Can you give a sense of the timeline and any sort of reasoning or barriers or what the purpose of the new timeline is?
Well, I think that, we're still looking to see what a reasonable timeline for rollout would be, and it'd probably be, in late summer, early fall, and, it's still a moving target. So I think that, one of the issues is that we want to make sure that we have the necessary capacity. We were challenged last time by construction issues and getting the beds up and ready. I want to make sure that our providers have the appropriate staff and the training, and that we have the policies and protocols in place. So, and that we deepen our capacity to provide the sets of services that we need, that we have the tools that we need to be able to make good decisions as to what programs, the match between young people and the services out there. And so there's a lot of work that remains to be done. I want to make sure that phase one, that we continue to work on phase one and improve phase one. And this is really hard work. So there's a lot more work to be done.
In the back.
Shane Karaya from the Council of State Government's Justice Center. There was brief discussion on risk assessments being administered through probation, and I didn't really have a good understanding of what are the factors that push toward and pull away from probation administering those at intake.
At intake?
Or, I'm sorry, just generally.
Well, I mean, I think when we're assessing a kid for adjustment, for example, or when we're doing an assessment to write a report for the court, we totally should do that. I think that my feeling is that we should give the administrator of ACS, the commissioner of ACS, the greatest leeway in figuring out which facility a kid should go into once they come into their custody. And that probation, I guess we could develop an expertise in that area. We are, with Vera's help, developing a risk assessment instrument. I just don't know that it's a decision we or the court should be making. I think really that the best way for that to occur is to leave that to the experts who are going to have to, have the kid in their care the whole time. I don't see why probation needs to opine on that, as opposed to Gladys' staff being able to opine on it once the kid enters their facility. We'll do it if the law requires us to. We are required now because the state runs limited secure and the city runs non-secure. But I hope that that's for a shorter period of time as possible, because I just don't see why we have skin in that game.
Did that answer your question?
Felipe wants to retort.
No, but I mean, I think it's a little.
Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, Felipe Franco, Deputy Commissioner of CFS. The law requires actually every part of the state to eventually determine in the court between non-secure and limited secure. So even if that old days of non-specified will come back, judges are going to have to determine between non-secure and limited secure. But I'm with you. I mean, at the end of the day, a system should have the ability to provide the needs of kids in non-secure and limited secure, and it should be up to my former commissioner to figure out where they should go.
Who else wants to weigh in? Oh, come on. Here we go. Third row. Oh, yeah. Oh.
Hi, I'm Tim Lawson from Action Research, and also a proud Vera alum. I'm wondering about your opinion or stance toward restorative justice programs. So once a kid enters formal processing in the juvenile justice system, there tends to be a momentum that starts to happen, even though your efforts to slow that momentum and reverse it are really terrific. I'm wondering if you have thoughts as we enter a new administration about expanding restorative justice programs in the juvenile justice system.
So I really, I know that we have a few. I don't, it's interesting that New York State has never been really at the forefront of using restorative justice, and I think that that is an important tool and approach, and so I'm open to really exploring it more and seeing how we can integrate it into our programming.
Commissioner Carrión, for those in the room that don't know what restorative justice means, can you sort of explain?
What do you mean by restorative justice?
I have a slight, I'll try to speak up, but excuse the voice. Some systems have experimented with interventions where when there's a delinquency arrest, instead of going through a formal court process with the agreement of both the victim and the perpetrator, and usually their families, they conference and come up with a solution to ameliorate the situation among themselves that they all accept, that is then binding. And so it sort of skirts probation, the court process, and in many instances, both the victim and the perpetrators are much happier with that kind of outcome rather than the formal process.
In Red Hook, and there's some, there's some programs already that take that approach. I think that what we need is better collaboration with the police and probation and all of us really working together to develop, and I think Vinny has done a really good job of developing programs in communities that really respond to community needs, and that there is different approaches available that respond to what the preferences are of both community, families, of all of the parties involved in the justice system. And I think that we need more collaboration among all of us in really coming up with these strategies, because there are a lot of different people that have to buy into that. So I think it's really important for us to be able to work better with our other partners.
We have a question in the second row here. Oh, third and then second. Okay.
My name is Eduardo Padro. I'm the juvenile offender judge sitting in Manhattan. I have one question as a judge and one as a community member. As a judge, the easy one is, are the juvenile offenders at all part of this agenda? And does anybody have any sense of what's happening with regards to the 13, 14, 15-year-olds charged with violent crimes that are being treated as adults?
Offenders versus delinquents.
Right.
I actually think, Judge, that the commission's charge is going to be pretty broad, and it's going to look at that segment of the population. And that's going to be my understanding is that's going to be part of the charge for them to look at the juvenile offender law, to look at the services, how we provide for supports now and alternatives, and the possibility for alternatives and diversion for that population. So I think it is going to be part of that conversation at the commission level.
As a judge, is that a concern for you?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's his point.
Yeah.
We're in a completely different model.
Yeah.
That's all it talks about.
What we're going to do, our system is very simple. They're adults, and if they're convicted of any of the felonies, they must go off state. So we, the juvenile offender judges, have got to find a basis to justify youthful offense status. Otherwise, all of them are mandated to go off state. As a member of the community, the second question is, first of all, this was worth the price of admission. It was worth getting up in the morning. As a member of the community, talk about hope, and I leave with a lot of hope. However, I find myself that a lot of the discussions, we're trying to be proactive in a, what I perceive to be a reactive setting, meaning that we're getting these kids at the end of all these other processes. They end up in our system. And so my question, when Rukia was talking about the schools to prison pipeline, by the way, Judge K just had a whole report come out on that I would recommend for everybody. But I know I've been battling with the advocates in my courtroom, and I keep saying, really, the conversation to me has got to go a little deeper, which is the community to jail pipeline that nobody seems to want to address. And it was interesting listening to Marion Wright Edelman talk about from the crib to the jail pipeline that's really in place. And so my question is, are we aware of any concomitant conversations, and there's no subject matter today, but are we aware of any concomitant conversations about how we address all these other issues that have taken, the changes that have taken place in the community from when we grew up versus the realities today?
How much time do you have? Does anyone want to touch on that a little bit? We have one more question before we wrap up, but it's a big important question.
I think it gets added to the wish list, right? I mean, and it's on my wish list. But I think it speaks to collaboration that Commissioner Carrión just talked about. And it speaks to what Commissioner Schiraldi was talked about. And it speaks to what my brother over here has talked about in terms of really ensuring that the communities themselves are resourced. And even before, and that means services that are being provided and training for community members before a young person even gets into the system.
Giving help before there's a problem,
right.
Before there's like preventative medicine.
Right.
I guess the only thing I want to add to that, Judge, and maybe that's why I paused, and I so rarely pause before speaking, so it's a moment for me, is that even with that, and if we could do better things and should do better things preventing kids from getting in trouble in the first place, automatically trying 13, 14, and 15-year-olds as adults, automatically having every 16 and 17-year-old go to the adult system is sort of indefensible, all that other stuff notwithstanding. I mean, no matter how good we do on helping kids live healthy lives outside the justice system. We're going to have a justice system, and some kids are going to go to it. And damn it, we shouldn't have those things. I mean, those are wrong at a very basic level. But I'm not trying to sort of say that your question is wrong in any sense of the word, but I just don't want to lose that amidst all of that. And I'm glad Governor Cuomo has sort of jumped on that issue, and I look forward to what the commission comes out with. But I don't want to forget, because too often we think, well, gee, if we would just stop them at the front end, we wouldn't have to worry about this. No, damn it, we have to worry about this, and we got a moment now, so we need to drive our truck through that hole.
And I just want to add to that, because I think it's significant to worry about both.
Yeah.
I really do think it's significant to worry about both, because, you know, even though we've seen these these great changes over the past 12 years in juvenile justice, we also haven't seen as much growth, in my opinion, on the other end in terms of resourcing communities and making sure that it does not happen in the first place. So we really have to make sure. I mean, with a merger like ACS and DJJ, you know, that's an opportunity to really start to think about how we can do both of those things at the same time and strategically, because it's extremely important. Because I completely agree that.
We have a final question or thought?
It's actually not a question. It was a follow-up to Tim's question about restorative justice.
Will you just say who you are?
Oh, yes, sorry. Ana Bermudez, Deputy Commissioner for Juvenile Operations at Probation. And our department is very committed to that. Right now, actually, all young people who get diverted from court and whose cases are adjusted go through a restorative interview and process with their parents. Eventually, we want to get to the point where we can actually involve the victims of the incident or the affected parties of the incident. We've been working with the Peace Institute, but their funding is also limited, and it like Commissioner Carrión said, it hasn't gained as much traction as you think it should. It should be used in every school. Every school should have a restorative justice approach to discipline and community building, because it does both. And it also goes to the issues we were talking about of mitigating risk, because it's a process that develops empathy in the people involved for each other and develops community. So all this talk about how to involve community, restorative practices is a way of doing it. And it has various applications at different points of the system, as well as in different versions in the community. So we're big proponents of it. I hope that it does, take hold, and we'll continue working on it.
Okay, Kathleen, if I could just say something really quickly.
Final thought?
One final thought. No, and just to the topic of, the community, to prison pipeline and the school to prison pipeline, I think that there has to be reevaluation of what the term safety means in New York State, and really addressing the fact that, safety here does not mean that we have to incarcerate young people or put them through, risk assessments or, identifying what the needs are, but really just going to the core of the fact that young people need those relationships, that education again, that assisted me in the process, and realizing that those two things, along with others, family engagement and others, lead to safety in the end. And I think that that's something that everyone needs to be more educated on, including the community, so that they better, understand that process and take all of this work in a very, effective manner, as opposed to just addressing it as, oh no, we don't want to help young people, we just want to deal with them in another way.
Especially as Mayor de Blasio is vowing to increase trust between police and the community. So it's a important moment. Yes.
It's a great closing statement.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm sure there'll be more coffee and muffins to be consumed.